Good morning. So, after we received the news that HB 1085 was officially signed into law, I wanted to try to address some of the bigger questions that people seem to be having about the law as best I can answer them. I don't have all of the answers, and it's entirely possible that I will get some things incorrect because there are some elements of this that are rather confusing, and implementation and rules setting and things of that nature will come into play. But nevertheless, I think I can provide some clarity here. I'm Adam Fumanaya, the Executive and Clinical Director at Delve Psychotherapy of Chicago. We have immediate openings available for individual, couples, family, and group psychotherapy. We also have a training program and are starting a social work advocacy training program this year as well to support some of these advocacy efforts. And we also have very low sliding scale options available via telehealth as well for clients in Illinois. So, obviously, the part of the bill that is getting the most attention is the rates increase that's going to be coming our way. But this is only one piece of a much broader bill, and some of the other changes are really rather exciting. Firstly, it has long been a problem in our industry that we were not able to, in many cases, bill for multiple services in the same day. You couldn't see your psychiatrist on the same day that you saw your psychotherapist. You couldn't go to family therapy on the same day that you went to individual psychotherapy, which is deeply problematic for people who are trying to acquire multiple services to support their mental health care overall. It meant that clinicians couldn't get paid, and it often meant delays or a complete loss of care. So, this change in particular, I think, is monumental. We've also seen, especially with Medicare auditing, that 90837 auditing was growing at a federal level. And again, that's Medicare, and this bill cannot touch anything that is happening with respect to Medicare. Nevertheless, there was a long-standing fear amongst clinicians that there was pressure against using the 90837 billing code and toward using the 90834 billing code. I have long felt that we need to reject the very premise that 90834 is the default billing code. I disagree foundationally. I believe psychotherapy, the standard frame for psychotherapy, is an hour, and the closest billing code is 90837. So, this new law, HB 1085, now says that they cannot audit 90837 any more than any other billing code, which is a nice, nifty little protection. We're also going to see faster contracting and rostering with these insurance companies. So it should be that gone are the days that we have to wait months on end for an insurance company to get back to us about joining their network. We cannot abet a system in which Illinoisans have insurance and there are providers available and we cannot get them care because whatever insurance company is delaying allowing us to even join their network, allowing us to even submit for claims and payments. There's no reason in the middle of a mental health crisis, in the middle of a substance abuse crisis in our state, more broadly, that we can be denying care in this red tapey kind of way. It's just not acceptable. Lastly, it is now a matter of law that services rendered by trainees are insurance reimbursable. This is so foundationally important. Let's not forget that, again, we are in the midst of a mental health crisis in this state, and this is meant to be a parity bill as well, and being in parity with other medical professionals. If you go to see a doctor, it's not always the case that the fully licensed doctor that's board certified, etc., is the one rendering all services. Nevertheless, it is the case that many of those services rendered by trainees in their industries are insurance reimbursable. There's no excuse for not allowing the same in our industry, and I think it's fundamentally important to ensuring that we can actually grow the field in terms of raw number of practitioners, especially as we start to see other forces pushing against the possibility of developing that workforce even further. So these are the five arms of the bill, and I think it's a great foundation. It's important to understand that not all insurance plans are affected by this.
Obviously, an Illinois law is not able to tell the federal government what to do with plans that are administered at the federal level. So that means that Medicare is not affected, and then many plans that are provided by very large employers are technically administered at a federal level by ERISA, meaning that the state of Illinois really can't do anything to affect those plans. Some others that are not affected are many of the municipality plans. So plans that are provided by the city of Chicago, or if there is a plan that's provided by Naperville or something of that nature, those plans remain unaffected in this bill, as well as the state government plans themselves. So the plans that are affected are the ones that are private insurance administered by the state. And there is another law that came into effect that is requiring that the administrator, for instance, IDOI here in Illinois, needs to be printed on the card itself. So we should be seeing that coming into effect relatively shortly as well. So it should be clearer which plans are actually affected by this. I just want to clarify why that would be the case one more time. Illinois law cannot tell the federal government what to do with plans that it administers, as well as in the midst of a budget deficit at the state and with respect to many of the larger municipalities, it'd be a tough sell to try to ask them to be paying more at this point in time. And so clearly those plans needed to be exempted to be able to get this passed for the other plans. There's some cynicism about this. I've heard quite a lot of cynicism about the fact that so few plans are included, but I was able to get an estimate of the percentage of private sector enrollees that would be enrolled in plans that would be administered by the state. So this comes from the Medical Expenditure Panel survey, and this particular table shows that in Illinois, if we look at this row, about 59.4% would have been enrolled in self-insured plans. So the opposite of that is the fully funded plans, which are administered by the state, which puts us at about 40.6% of all private sector enrollees that would be in plans that are administered by the state. By far, the issue that I see most discussed about this bill is the rate increase and the confusingness around it. I promise you that it was heavily negotiated for a very long time and was very carefully thought out. That was one of the things that took the longest to ensure was actually solidified, but now it is codified into law, and let me do my best to walk you through this step by step and how we got to where we got in this. Remember, as we're going through this, this is a parity bill. They are supposed to treat us the same as they do all other medical providers. If they're not, that gap is the problem. So that's the framing, that's the mentality that we're working with here. So the Research Triangle Institute had published this report, this beefy report, exploring the issue of behavioral health parity and pervasive disparities. And the law literally tells us to look at this exact report and find a specific figure on a specific page, page C 52. If we go to page C 52, we're meant to go to line 1, which is the rate that all Illinois medical and surgical clinicians get relative to Medicare. So essentially, whatever the Medicare rate is, the RTI report found that Illinois medical and surgical clinicians are making 132% of the Medicare rate. So that's where we're starting with, is that 132% number. You can see right below this, the 109% figure is what behavioral health clinicians were making relative to Medicare. So now we're quantifying that discrepancy, right? That's really important that we're now kind of seeing that discrepancy actually quantified. Also relevant to the calculations are going to be the 75th percentile values, 151.4% for medical and surgical clinicians. We're going to end up plugging the 151.4 value into our formula. Why are we using 151.4%? Why are we employing the 75th percentile? Well, remember, this bill is establishing our rate floor. It would be weird for us to decide that our rate floor is at the average that a medical or surgical clinician is receiving. There are many medical and surgical clinicians that are making much more than that. And we're not trying to put our floor at their average. That's not parity. But at the same time, we're also not trying to be greedy and or try to make every insurance company go broke and balloon premiums and all of the fear mongering that's been thrown at this problem. So the compromise was struck that we can utilize the difference between the 75th percentile and the average to help us establish our floor. It's not asking for the moon, and it's not asking us to just set our floor at their average.
Okay, let's talk mentality again here. So, the average, that 132%, that 132% that we saw, the average amount that a medical surgical professional was getting from a commercial insurance provider relative to Medicare represents kind of what the average, the Joe Schmo medical surgical person might be getting. Now, it's clearly the case that in some instances there are incentives to try to get medical and surgical providers to join networks. There's very much the point that they do need people to come from particular specialties and practices, etc. And how do you incentivize them? You pay them more. If there was no incentive program happening here, then the 50% mark percentile, the 50th percentile and the 75th percentile would have a remarkably similar number. So if there is any gap between the 50th percentile and the 75th percentile, that means that they are sometimes incentivizing. Now, that could be a particular insurance provider is trying to incentivize relative to other insurance providers, or it could be that particular specialties are being incentivized more or less. There's a lot baked into that, but it's clear evidence that people are going above and beyond what the average person, the average doctor, is getting. And there's a clear incentive structure in place. Now, here we are again. We are dealing with behavioral health networks being far too small and network participation being far too small. One, we need parity also with respect to incentives. So we actually need to represent the incentive program that they've got. But also, we need to grow our networks, which means we need to incentivize. So we need this kind of calculation of incentivization somehow incorporated into this. And again, not asking for the moon, just trying to base our ask on real numbers that come from the RTI report. I'm just going to say the most in the weedsy parts of this, especially the mentality stuff and the raw math stuff and the exact way that all of it's going to shake out, is the most likely place where I am to have made a mistake. So if you know otherwise, please let me know and I'll post a follow up and I will try to clarify as best I can. So then, the incentivization calculation, the estimate, the kind of bump that we're getting to try to somehow represent that incentivization is represented in this part of the overall formula. 151.4%, which was the 75th percentile for medical surgical in Illinois relative to the Medicare rate. That's the 75th percentile. The 132 is the 50th percentile, and we're just averaging those two numbers. Let me have the average of the difference. That's how we represent the incentive. That's really only a 9.7% bump. I think that's a rather modest ask. So now we can look at the whole formula. We're going to start at the 50th percentile, that 132. We're going to add that incentivization calculation, that 9.7, and we land at 141.7. Got it? But then the critical question, 141% of what? So every year, Central Medicare Services publishes a physician fee schedule, and this is the amount that Medicare must pay for a given procedure code in a given region. And you can find that procedure code at this URL here. Once you accept the terms, then you're brought to this particular form. And if we search for the CPT code 90837, the one that we should view as the default psychotherapy procedure code, I'm not accepting that 90834 argument. I just refuse to accept it. Anyway, once we plug in 90837 as the CPT code, we can search in this specific MAC locality. So you go to this option, hit specific MAC locality, then search for, let's say, Chicago.
At that point, you will get the table that shows that the non-facility price is 158.54. So if you take 158.54 times 1.417, then you'll get the new floor being 224.65. Now, master's level clinicians are offered 75% of what a clinical psychologist would make. So that previous value is going to be what a clinical psychologist in Chicago would make. But if we were to look instead at what a marriage and family therapist or a counselor would make, then we need to be using the 75% value. So a clinical psychologist in Chicago would make 158.54 from Medicare for 90837. Therefore, a counselor would go 158.54 times 0.75, and we get 118.91. Then we could take the 118.91 and multiply that by our magic number. Whoops, be careful with your decimal points, everyone. 1.417. So 118.91 times 1.417, and we get the new counselor rate, which is 168.495, or would end up being 50 cents. So 168.50. Make sense? So several more things. Firstly, the provisions in this bill are expected to go into effect in 2027. As well, there might be a concern that maybe Medicare drops its rates at some point. This is a big worry. There are provisions in the bill that say that if from one year to the next the Medicare rate drops, then we are still to be paid. The floor is still set at whatever the previous year's rate was. So we cannot go down. I've also seen quite a lot of concern that there may be a kind of a ballooning of premiums as a result of this. And that was some of the rhetoric that was used to counter lobby this bill for a while, but it does not hold water for a number of reasons. Firstly, mental health care spending is a small proportion of overall healthcare spending. These aren't the big dollars. They're very important to us, and I think they're very important to the health of the populace. But this is not where a lot of the money goes. You think about spending several hours talking to me is much less expensive than spending 1 hour with a surgeon. So it's there. We're not talking the same amount of dollars, and most of the premium amounts end up coming from physical health care. Not to mention, the insurance companies themselves have published reports that have indicated that increasing spending on mental health care decreases spending on physical health care. You think about the preponderance of evidence that has indicated that better mental health improves physical health. It also improves the quality of your relationships, which can then improve the quality of your health overall, both because people are helping you to notice health problems, helping you to address health problems, but also just helping you to feel a more complete and connected life. But also, very directly, sometimes psychotherapists are the ones who are noticing physical health problems first and getting people to go see a physical health practitioner way earlier in the progress of a disease, if you will, than in the normal course of things. We do have some training at being able to notice things and get people connected to the right services. Moreover, there are significant injuries that happen as a result of mental health problems. Those injuries often require physical health treatment. Those injuries would not have happened otherwise. Better mental health care and more mental health spending, obviously, and it has been evidenced to be the case, decreases physical health spending overall. This is just a good idea. But in case we're wrong, in case there is some deleterious effect on the networks or some ballooning of the insurance premiums or some other unforeseen consequence of this law that we just did not anticipate, in case that is the case, the law does stipulate that we must have impact reports published at regular intervals. The first one comes out in 2030, the second one comes out in 2035, and the third comes out in 2040. So we're not just going with it. We are also going to be simultaneously implementing and monitoring the impact of this law over time.
There were so many people involved in making this a reality. And of course, with every law, we wish that we could have done more. We wish that we could have included more plans or more protections or more money or more checkpoints or anything of that nature. Of course, we'd want more. But my overwhelming experience of being involved in a small way on this whole thing has been just to be so incredibly impressed with the professionalism and the intelligence and the thoughtfulness of many of the lawmakers that we interacted with, many of the lobbyists that were in support of the bill, and many of the advocates that we saw throughout Illinois, as well as the Research Triangle Institute and so many other people that were involved in just helping to make this whole thing a reality. Now, obviously, none of this could have been possible without our two chief co-sponsors. So Lindsay Lapointe was the chief co-sponsor in the House, and I know for a fact that at the moments when this bill looked dead, she didn't let it leave her eyes. She was such an incredibly staunch supporter of this thing, and frankly, was just not going to let it go. And I just was so impressed with her steadfast resolve. And the same goes for our Senate chief co-sponsor, Senator Karina Villa. The bill ended up in the Senate for quite a while, and it required a lot of effort and foresight and intentionality and good communication with important people to make sure that this thing stayed alive and got across the finish line. And it did. It did as a result of many, many, many people's efforts. But we certainly have to support the two lawmakers who were most vociferous in the support of this thing right from the start. So thank you to you both, and thank you to everybody for sitting through me talking about policy and math for what did we end up with? Like 20 minutes? I appreciate it. If you need anything from me, you're welcome to reach out to me. I'll respond to as many people as possible, but I can be reached at adam@delphpsych.com. And if I don't get back to you, please message me again. Eventually I will, or I'll tell you to stop. One or the other. Thank you so much for listening.